Hi, this is Lori, and this is my homework for Paul McWhorter's Pico W course, lesson number 21. In this lesson, we're supposed to use our DHT11 temperature and humidity sensor along with the button to switch between temperature in Fahrenheit, temperature in Celsius, and then humidity printed to the shell. So I've got that going, and as you can probably see, I am yet again back at Camp Failer doing some homework. Little delayed, hoping to get this posted soon. So I have my setup here, and it's a little shaky, so sorry if sometimes when I'm working on my computer things are going to kind of move a little bit because I don't have a very stable table here in the screen room. But here's my layout, so you can see there is the DHT11 that we've been working with, but this is also a DHT22, which is supposed to be a little bit better, maybe a little more accurate, give a little more precision than the 11, so I thought I'd put it on here and see how it compares. And then this other one I have over here is a BME 280 sensor, and uses I2C to communicate to the Pico, and it does temperature and humidity and pressure as well, but we'll just use the temperature and humidity part of it. So my second part of my homework, I'm going to use all three of those sensors in the program, and that's why I have two buttons. So this yellow button will be used to change between Fahrenheit, Celsius for temperature and humidity, and the red button will be used to switch between the different sensors when I get to the second part of my homework. Here's the code that I used to do the homework as Paul requested, using only the DHT11, and then being able to use the button to rotate between temperature in Celsius, temperature in Fahrenheit, and then humidity. So we'll import all the needed modules and set up our DHT11 on pin 17 for me. Then here's my button that I will use to switch between the different kinds of readings. And I'll need a variable to keep track of, which item we're displaying. 1 for temp and C, 2 for temp and F, and then 3 will be humidity. And I have a variable to do the debouncing here because I'm going to use interrupt functions as I have been doing in my homework with these buttons. So to do an interrupt function, I'll write that here. I'll call it reading handler, and it's connected to the reading button. This little piece of code does the debouncing, so unless there's been at least 300 milliseconds, it won't count that as a real press. And then I will switch between the different modes every time we press the button. So if it's on a 1, it'll go to a 2. If it's on a 2, it'll go to a 3. And then otherwise, that means it's currently a 3 and it needs to go back to a 1. Now, I know you can use modulo math to do this, and maybe it's a little more efficient and elegant, but I think this is a little easier to read and to remember the intent of what you're trying to do here. So that's why I wrote it this way. Then we have the interrupt request, just setting that up using the reading handler function that I just wrote. Then we've all learned that the DHT11 needs some time to initialize, so I'm going to let it sleep a couple of seconds so it can get all settled in. And then we'll set a previous time variable to the current time. And this is a concept that Keith Lohmeyer, one of our other students, showed us all so that we can get faster response of our button. And I had never seen that before, and I've been doing this for a little while, so that I guess I just never had that issue. So it was a really great tip, and I'm going to use it right here. The blink without delay, I guess, is what they call it in Arduino world. So I'm going to set that up and use that approach so my button is very responsive. Then just get the initial reading and calculate everything I need for that, because as I come into the while true loop, I'm only going to read from the DHT11 every 2 seconds. So it checks to see is 2 seconds gone by. If it has, then it'll go through the reading process. But if it hasn't, it'll just come in here and do the printing based on whatever we're currently have for our toggle value. So this loop will run a lot faster than every 2 seconds. So that'll make sure our button is nice and responsive. And then I'm using a try and accept just so that we can exit cleanly, and I'll leave a little message that it's done at the end here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this one. There we go. And it'll take a couple seconds for the first reading to come, and now you can see we're in degrees C. And press the button, we go to degrees F, and press the button again, we get our humidity, and you can see cycle around very quickly. All right, so that was the homework that we were assigned from Paul. All right, so this is the program I wrote to put all of these sensors together, the DHT11, the 22, and the BME 280. And we'll use the yellow one to switch between the different measurements, and the red one will switch between the sensors. So the yellow one will just switch between degrees C and F and show the humidity, and then the red button will switch the sensors. And again, I'm using that blink without delay concept that Keith taught us all. So we'll import everything we need, and so this time we also need to import the DHT22 from that library, and then I also need to import a library to use the BME 280 that I loaded through Thonny. The BME 280 uses the I2C way to communicate, so we'll have to set that up. So I have it plugged into pins 4 and 5 right here. So that'll set that part up, and then we'll go ahead and set up the 11 and 22, and you can see that using the 22 is almost identical to using the 11, so very similar. And then I have to set up the two buttons, and we'll have a scale toggle, so we'll go back and forth between C and F, and we'll have an interrupt function for that button. And then I'll have a variable to track which sensor I'm using. 1 is DHT11, 2 is the 22, and 3 is BME 280. And then we'll have a variable that keep track of that switch sensor. And we'll start out with 11 as our first sensor. And then we'll have to have a debounce time for that interrupt function as well. And then here's the two interrupt functions. The one that switches the scale here, so in this case we just have to use the naught to switch back and forth every time we press the button. And then just like in the homework that I just showed, I'm using the if, elif, else construct to switch between the sensors. I'll set up those two interrupt requests, do a little sleeping to let the 11 and 22 initialize, then use that previous time to use the blink without delay. Not with, blink without. And then I wrote a function to get all the readings, because so many readings to put together. I thought maybe I'd put that all in a function since it's a lot of code. So it'll create a list called enviro data, and we'll measure the 11 and 22, and then we'll just start appending in all the pieces to the list after doing the calculation for Fahrenheit. Then we'll do the 22, same kinds of calculations. Then to read the BME 280, this is the code that we'll use for that. So you can see here's the I2C, and this particular device, the way I have it set, I've got it plugged into ground over here, so that sets the address to 76. And then I'll have to do the calculations that I need for the temperature and humidity. As you can see, the result comes back as text from this sensor, so I'll have to convert everything, and it actually appended the C onto the end of, you can see here's an example. I put it in the code here. This is what you get out of the read, so I have to pull these things off of here. There's the pressure that I'm ignoring, but that's the pressure, and so I'm pulling those things off so I can treat them as numbers in my printing. So that was a little frustrating, but got that done. And then I'll append all that into the enviro data list as well. And then it's what I'll return out of that function. So we'll go ahead and read the data and get the current results. And then we'll come into the while true, and it's still very similar in concept to what we did for the homework. We'll check and make sure that we're only going to read every 2 seconds. So unless that goes by, we're not going to do a new read. And then we'll just print out based on which sensor we have, and you can see I've kind of labeled them so we'll know which one is giving us the current data. And we have whether the scale toggle is true or false. We'll say which one, whether we're going to give Celsius or Fahrenheit. And that should do it. All right, so let's run this one. All right, we're starting off with the 11. And let's just check and see if we can switch the scale. There we go to Fahrenheit, back to Celsius, back to Fahrenheit. All nice and fast using that blink without delay. Let's switch to the next sensor. So that's the 22. And button also works on that one. And we'll go to the BME 280. And you can see we can switch scale there as well. So, yeah. And you can see they're slightly different, but pretty close to each other. Very similar results. Well, that's my homework. Enjoyed the lesson, Paul. Thanks for watching.